Hello, all you merry listeners. I just thought I'd pop on here to Happy Times and Places to wish you all a very happy Doctor Who 60th birthday. Can't believe it's been 60 years. Thank you so much for listening to Toby's fabulous podcast. And please continue listening for at least the next 60 years. But happy birthday to us. Lots of love.
Hello, Toby. And hello to the podcast. I don't want to pull rank, but I'm here in Chicago at a Doctor Who convention. And conveniently, I'm also here to say a very, very happy 60th birthday to Doctor Who. Who'd have thought it? And what a ride it's been, not just for the Doctor, but for me personally. What a fantastic time. Where would we be without him? So, happy birthday, Doctor Who.
Of course, thank you so much there to Sophie Aldred and to Lisa Bowerman, completing my mission to get a companion from every classic Doctor. Sophie did that, and then I thought, well, I can't leave Lisa out as well, because she is an important and a legitimate part of the Doctor Who universe, is Bernice Summerfield, and so it seemed natural that having got Sophie, I top it off there with Lisa as well. So thank you to all the classic series companions: Peter Purvis, Annika Wills, Katie Manning, Louise Jameson, Nicola Bryant, Matthew Waterhouse, Sophie Aldred and Lisa Bowerman there, who've given you birthday messages recorded exclusively for Happy Times and Places. I am so lucky that the Who family are kind enough to bestow their time and effort upon me with no reward other than the fact that they kind of did it. And it makes me feel sick to my stomach to ask for such favours. So I do hope you liked those messages. However, we have a job to do. We have to now reconvene post An Unearthly Child, which I have watched and commentated upon on a previous instalment of this, but I have yet to get through all the special guests who have recorded contributions for me in which they tell me their favourite things about the episodes, just the first episode, An Unearthly Child, and I've got guests from across the Who spectrum, and hopefully they will be, because I haven't heard any of these, I will be responding to them live. They will be choosing lots of different things about those first 25 minutes that hopefully I won't run out of interesting things to say about. It may be argued that I've already run out of interesting things to say, but I'm going to have a bash anyway. So with An Unearthly Child, I hope, playing through your head, let's continue our post-mortem with some of the best forensic appreciators of Doctor Who have also had in hand in its creation in various different forms. Well, as you've probably gathered by now, this podcast is several, and I didn't record it all at the same time. I did start recording going into the 23rd of November. I'm still recording towards the end of the 23rd of November. I've basically spent most of the 23rd of November putting this podcast together that I plan to have completed before the 23rd of November and just, schedule to go out and leave it in the lap of the gods. But of course, the best laid plans of Doctor Who episodes, as we know, gang after glay. And so I've still got a large number of guests to give me their 5 favourite things about An Unearthly Child. If you've been listening to these in the correct order, you heard my commentary. I've actually since then, because it is the 23rd of November, and as is my wont, I watched the first episode of Doctor Who ever, An Unearthly Child, go out again. So I watched it to do the commentary, less than 24 hours ago, or about 24 hours ago, whenever it was. But then I watched it again today at 16 minutes past 5 as the first episode of this went onto iTunes, and I'd just walked the dog. I'd been on a very Doctor Who dog walk with two friends of mine, one of whom restores the pictures for the Blu-rays, and one of whom just produces and directs the animations of things like the Underwater Menace and Evil of the Daleks. So it was the three dog walks. Ha ha ha! There was my dog, Peter's dog, and Anne Marie's dog. I won't tell you which one was just done on film at Ealing and slotted in later. So and got back, and we got caught in the rain and then got caught in the traffic. And I got back with sort of, I think, 12 minutes to spare to get that first episode into shape and get it out onto iTunes, and then be ready to watch An Unearthly Child again, just for pleasure. Having watched it to commentate through, I watched it for pleasure, but with an eye on the fact that I would be talking about it, which I seem to have spent quite a lot of time doing recently. But I did notice things that I sort of didn't notice when I was talking all the way through it, as you do, of course. You know, the bits of dialogue and little moments that are missed when one is, you know, performing and recalling and sort of trying to think of apposite or interesting or funny things to say. So, I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving. I can't speak for this podcast, but the episode that this podcast is about. But anyway, on my quest, I have been blessed with, because, you know, I know I'm not a draw, but I get some very interesting guests, and I have more interesting guests to come. And you've had a few fans, historians, writers, a comedian who does a Doctor Who show, a sitcom writer who's had great success on television and had a couple of lines in an episode of Doctor Who as an actor, some of the Doctor Who Renaissance people, a great Doctor Who historian, one of the early fans, one of the newer fans, an international fan, and even as a couple of people who've worked on the televised show, the old televised show back in the day. But I think, shall we move into more modern times? Well, actually, let's go first with someone who has a foot in both camps. Has not quite reached the current TV version of Doctor Who, New Who as it is called, but has written lots of Doctor Who fiction, but is also a very, very gifted historian and has been writing something of great relevance to An Unearthly Child. So I'm gonna assume that he will introduce himself and tell you why he is relevant, and hopefully tell us 5 very interesting things that he likes about An Unearthly Child.
Hello, Toby. It's Simon Guerrier here. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. What a joy to watch this first episode of Doctor Who. What a masterpiece it is. It's thrilling, atmospheric, compelling, strange, beautifully shot, beautifully framed. How in heaven am I going to choose 5 favourite things? Okay, here goes. My first favourite thing about An Unearthly Child is the opening theme tune and title sequence, which is absolutely perfect for grabbing the attention. It's so strange, it's so haunting, it's so unlike anything else. And then brilliantly, it bleeds into this rather spooky, foggy scene of a junkyard and a policeman, and this police box standing there making a strange noise. So the radiophonic workshops work on the theme tune leads into a radiophonic sound effect, and I just love it. It's so odd, and immediately just grabs the attention without a word being spoken. How clever.
Well, yes, and isn't that... Some people have gone, I mean, I went the sound, didn't I, which sort of encapsulated the theme tune. And I was going to do the TARDIS takeoff because that then encapsulates those graphics. And then actually I got waylaid. So I'm glad that Simon has put them front and centre as his first thing, because they are magnificent. I like all the first 4 title sequences. But I think, I know there's a couple of different variations of the Pertwee one, but that's a bit like the Baker one, and all of the, up till the Starfield. I like the Starfield, but the Starfield to me is new. It's the newfangled title sequence. Pre-Starfield, I think all vie with me very, very strongly. But I think for my favourite, much as I love that first Pertwee one, but I think battles between the classic Tom Baker Time Tunnel, which I think is a work of genius, and the Hartnell one, which is, much simpler in a way, but I think is so spooky and moody and evocative, and it speaks of Doctor Who in the way that it was conceived and put together. And isn't it amazing that we have all those title sequence tests as well? It also feeds into the sort of history and the archaeology that we've had to do, and the fact that various people have claimed to have been there when that title sequence was being done. We actually got the name of the guy wrong. Everyone thinks it was Tony Halfpenny. Bernard Lodge said that, I think, whose face was fed into the system. Actually, it turns out that it wasn't. So the bits that we found out, we go, oh, there's a bit of history. We found out the guy's name, and then you go, actually, that's not him. And so then you get new layers and new bits of archaeology, and you must never take anything for granted, because when I heard it was Tony Halfpenny, you go, oh yeah, okay then. And it's only when somebody goes, no, that doesn't look like him, and then I think it's this, and you go, oh. So Jim Stevens, I think he was called. Anyway, again, this is something I've put in my podcast and then promptly forgotten. I have it all written down, so if I need to put it in anything, I can consult it, but it's not necessarily in my head. Jim, he's called Jim something. I'm going to say Jim Stevens, but it's not Tony Halfpenny, which was a fact that we found out and took close to our hearts, and then it was, oh no, might not be, which means you always have to double check and you always have to keep looking. But anyway, that's an aside. But it is, it is part of the mythology, but amazing again that we have that stuff that we can find out and then refute and then dig deeper and find out new things. And we have not only the title sequence, but we've got the rejected bits as well. And in fact, I've just watched An Adventure in Space and Time because it's Doctor Who Day today, and it was a brand new Daleks in colour made by a contributor to this particular series of editions of Happy Times and Places, Ben Cook. And the opening titles of Adventure in Space and Time use some of the rejected opening title sequence material from that session. So amazing that it could still pass muster in a 21st century television program 50 years after it was done in an experimental session that nobody thought they might ever remember being part of, and then loads of people like Woodstock claim to have been at. Yeah, that title sequence really is the Woodstock of Doctor Who. And it was probably attended by that stormtrooper who banged his head, because I've met about 7 people who've claimed to be him as well. Right, second one of Simon Garrett. Simon, by the way, hasn't introduced what he does. I'm sure he needs no introduction. He's written some wonderful Big Finish work. Some of his he did a particular companion chronicle that I think is so special. Lots of great novelizations as well. Novels of original Doctor Who novels for the BBC, and he's also just released a book about David Whittaker, the script editor of An Unearthly Child, and I think a major part of its success and the success of a lot of the script elements and shaping of the show of early Doctor Who, and could easily have been one of my 5 favourite things about An Unearthly Child, and indeed was one of Jeremy Bentham's in an earlier episode. Hope that's not a spoiler. I hope you're listening to these episodes in order. But Simon's book on David Whittaker is a fastidious piece of work and has just come out, and definitely get it for your Christmas stocking. It's published by 10 Acre Films. Now I've said that, he's going to say that at the end, I bet you.
Then my second favourite thing about An Unearthly Child is how brilliantly it grounds the reality of the London setting. I remember when I interviewed the designer Michael Pickwoad for Doctor Who magazine, he said that what he felt he brought to Doctor Who in 2010 was that the sci-fi bits had been done to look very, very spectacular, but he could bring a bit of the contemporary reality and make the ground the reality so that everything became more convincing. I think a good example of this is the moment at which Ian drops his torch in the junkyard at Totters Lane, and we see the cobble floor of the junkyard very briefly. It may just be a pattern painted on the floor, but it's a level of detail that really grounds, that really sells the space we're in, the dirtiness of it, the uneven texture of it. There's that ladder that goes, the steps that go up, that Ian goes up a few bits, that just suggests a sort of 3-dimensional space. I think his laboratory in the school is full of props, and so feels like a real workable space. There's stuff written on the blackboard, all of those kind of things that suggests life outside the screen, and that this is a real space. I just found absolutely brilliant in selling the story and the setting and the reality of it, which makes my third favourite thing really work.
I don't want to hear your third favourite thing yet, Simon, so we may hear that bit of your dialogue twice, because I don't think there's a very good edit point there. Who knows what magic I will have to weave as I put this podcast together through increasingly sleepy eyes. Now, listen, there is something. I think it's one of the grimiest episodes of Doctor Who. In fact, the whole 4-parter, I love it at the end of the Firemaker, when they've done the chase through the jungle and all those, and they took their publicity photos then, didn't they? And it's like, here are the stars of your show, knackered, sweaty, and covered in grime, and I don't think they ever get quite as grimy ever again. There's a real sort of attention to the physical reality of time travel and the touch and the feel and the smell of everything seems so much more palpable in these first 4 episodes. It gets a bit, it gets a bit sort of cleaner, a bit more sterile, a bit more TV studio from here on in. I think there are instances, but I think Simon describes something that's true. Even of this first episode, is you can kind of feel it, and the must and the smell, and there's a it's something to do with the print that we've got, where the contrast, the inky blacks, are inkier than in some of the sort of more grayscale later episodes. And I don't know if that's because of the lighting or what Waris Hussein is trying to achieve, or whether that's just an accident of the print that we've got. But I always think of these as being rather more black and white, and that adds to what Simon's sort of talking about. And yes, he's right about those cobbles and the fact that it's a junkyard, and the fact that a lot of those props will have been pretty musty and cobwebby. I bet if somebody had slapped some of them, load of dust would have flown out. But yeah, nice. Not and also nicer than the cut is going to be between your bits 2 and 3, Simon. It was a very clever segue, but I don't need a clever segue. I need a clean edit point. So when it's the 70th anniversary, bear that in mind.
My third favourite thing about this is that extraordinary transition as Barbara steps through the TARDIS doors into the bright spaceship. It's such a great shock. It comes almost exactly halfway through the episode, so it's like an act change. You could almost imagine an advert break here, and I wonder if that was the intention. Even now, even though we know the history of Doctor Who, even though we know what's involved, it's still a shock. And it's such a great gag that there's this huge futuristic space inside this incongruous box in a junkyard.
It is, and we take it for granted these days, of course, because all of us, apart from the very lucky, not lucky in some ways, come to Doctor Who knowing that the TARDIS is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. I certainly, knew the TARDIS was bigger on the inside than it was on the outside. That was never a moment of great revelation to me. It was just something I sort of took for granted. Imagine being there for that first moment when they've got inside a box and the fact that it's so stark and white as well, and the fact that it's not the size that it is in later stories, that it is a massive set as well. And it's big and it's bright compared to all the inky darkness of the night and the junkyard. It is all about contrast there, and that set, that they've spent all that money on that set, which has to be completely different from everything else in the episode, and so it is. Particularly its immediate surroundings, the junkyard, which is old and knackered and fusty and cobwebby and dark and broken. It turns out the TARDIS itself is broken and is a bit knackered and cobwebby itself, but it's a different kind. It's space cobwebby. It's gleaming, it's white, it's bright, it's got that space noise. And it's a huge contrast. And how amazing that must have been. And what a stark cut it is, because it is a cut as well, because we know that there's a recording break there. And in fact, we can see it in action in the pilot and get the two goes at the second half. and so we've sort of got that moment, that transitional moment. We've almost got the sort of behind the scenes of it, and the two aborted attempts at that scene in the pilot. And I know there are some people, and I've had a little bit of feedback because obviously the earlier installment of this has been out as I'm recording this. That there are people who prefer the sort of darker, slightly more abstract elements in the pilot. And I can understand that, but I think that's a luxury that we have. I still think we would probably prefer, if we had no knowledge of the pilot, I think we would be perfectly happy with what we've got and still think it ideal. When you're given an alternative to what you've had, it always might appear a bit more attractive because it is a contrast to what you know and love. But I think pretty much that all the decisions they make are the correct ones. That change from the outside to the inside, nobody of my generation will really have got to have that heart in the mouth moment. And of course, that was one of the things that I think they probably worked hard to get completely right on Rose. And I wonder if they've worked on doing it for the new generation they're anticipating tuning in for the first time when Doctor Who relaunches, as it is about to do. Two relaunches it's getting the David Tennant specials, which are sort of, reminders in a way, and then there will be a relaunch for the new Doctor, and I'm sure they've got the new audience in mind, and they've got a great thing to gobsmack them with, and it's that inside that funny rackety box there's a massive gleaming spaceship. Ooooh.
My fourth favourite thing is a bit more esoteric, I think. It's the line the Doctor says as he sets the controls for the TARDIS and Susan tries to stop him. He says, "Get back to the ship, hold it." It's a really odd thing for him to say because they're already inside the spaceship. And it only occurred to me recently, and I put it in my Edge of Destruction book for the Black Archive, that there's something going on here. And there are some behind-the-scenes photos from the set of Doctor Who where William Hartnell and Carol Ann Ford are stood with their backs to the console, holding on to it. And as I say in my book, I think there was a plan originally for the TARDIS to have launch positions, that you needed to be stood at the console holding on, or, as what happens with Barbara and Ian in this first episode, you lose consciousness. And I think that's what's going on. There's some kind of launch positions like you get on a real space rocket. And although this is lost later on, it's too much of a kind of complication for the storytelling. What I really like about that is not so much the idea, but that I've seen this episode hundreds of times. I don't know, over and over again. And I've never spotted that before, and I've never made that connection before. So I'm choosing this because there's always something new. There's always something new to be seen. And that's what delights me about Doctor Who, just as a whole.
Yeah, me too. And that's a very good postulation, because they do deliberately hold it, and they have their back to the scanner, which makes for the sort of beautiful shot where the camera can go through them and they're standing, flanking it in a way. But yeah, they have assumed the position, and that makes absolute sense. And it makes sense of the fact that the TARDIS knocks the other two unconscious, which seems like a design flaw. That makes absolute sense. But yes, I also love the greater point of you can be watching an episode you've seen a gazillion times before and find and see something new, and it opens up all sorts of possibilities. And then we might find a scrap of paper that backs up what Simon has said, or there might be a bit in a rehearsal script somewhere else that refers back to it or something. And the always new bits and bobs to find out. And I totally buy that. I think that's a good theory. Simon's final thing?
I was torn about what my fifth favourite thing is. I think William Hartnell's Twinkly performance is amazing. It's such an improvement on how he's written and therefore played in the pilot episode. I think that's a marked benefit for this broadcast version. And I also note, watching it again for your for this, that Hartnell's really good on his marks. He's always in the right position for the camera. He's always in the right position for the close-ups. He's playing to the camera extremely well. There's even a sequence in the junkyard where he seems to look at the camera directly at us, as if he's joking with us, and we're sharing in the mischief, which is just such a brilliant performance. But much as I'd like to choose that, much as there are a whole load of other things I'd love to say, the regulars are brilliant. They're brilliantly written. We get a real sense of their different characters. We get a real sense of the emotional conflict. The tone of this episode is amazing. Norman Kay's music is brilliant. It's all just great. But my fifth favourite thing is the final shot of the TARDIS slightly askew on what is in effect an alien landscape, a landscape from prehistory, as the shadow falls upon it of a caveman. Now, I remember that vividly from the first time I saw this episode when I was 5 years old, and it was shown in 1981 as part of the Five Faces of Doctor Who. In fact, I didn't see the episode again until 1991, when the pilot was shown in the summer of 1991. And I remember watching that pilot amazed by... I didn't quite realise that it was a slightly different version, but I remember being amazed by how vividly I remembered this episode that I'd seen when I was 5. More than half my life before. And then I got it on video, and as I watched it on video, my dad, my late dad, who had watched it when it first went out, he had the same kind of reaction of going, I remember this really well, and really vividly. The only thing that he was surprised by was that he had forgotten it had been in black and white. But this episode is full of indelible images, the weird incongruity of the TARDIS, the weird incongruity of the spaceship inside the TARDIS, and this all the kind of close-ups and the sort of extreme reactions of everybody in it. It's a really compelling bit of drama, and it's really vivid and exciting, and kind of imprints itself on your memory. And what a thing, what a way to start, and how grateful we should all be. So yeah, those are my favourite things, and as I say, I'm really grateful that you got me to watch it. Happy birthday, Doctor Who.
Oh, thanks, Simon. He's one of the nicest people, Simon. I mean, that shouldn't influence you to buy his book, because he's also a fantastic writer and a brilliant, fastidious researcher. But he's a lovely big teddy bear of a man. And he left me a book that he'd written backstage or gave me it at one of my touring, must say, my Doctor Who scarfs. That was the first time that I met him. Yeah, he left me his book, The Pirate Loop. And we've been friends ever since, and it's always a delight to see him. And his book on David Whittaker is well worth it if you are a student of the early show. Thanks for that, Simon. Some great observations there, and I think that final shot is edging ahead, isn't it, as the thing that most people are choosing. Three Guitars Mood 2 is doing quite well. So are the school children. Think they might all be doing better than William Hartnell. But that's because I think people are trying to think outside the box as well and not go for the thing that everybody else is going for, which weirdly then means that perhaps nobody will choose the obvious things. Anyway, let's move on to another guest. Right, well, we are going to go on to the new series of Doctor Who, because I'm not all old school, but we still have one more link with Classic Who. So our next guest, who got this in just at the last minute, but he's important. He's an important part of these podcasts because he has actually provided a theme for one of the strands of Toby Hadoke's time travels. So let's get our last representative giving their favourite things of An Unearthly Child of Classic Who, and I'm hoping he will give you all the relevant information.
Hi, I'm Dominic Glynn, and I was a composer on Doctor Who in the late 80s with Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy. And here I am with my 5 favourite things about An Unearthly Child, Episode 1. So, number 1, I have to go for the theme music. Heard for the very first time, almost in its entirety in this episode. I really can't imagine how an audience would have felt hearing this otherworldly, mysterious, alien piece of music that genuinely sounds like nothing anyone had ever heard before. I was lucky enough to get the chance to rearrange the theme 23 years later, but I was fully aware that nobody would ever be able to repeat the innovation that this music represented. Created without synthesizers, just using oscillators, loops of tape, and incredible ingenuity, Delia Derbyshire and Dick Mills managed to, quite ironically really, create music that was timeless. It was very weird and yet totally accessible.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, I should have expected Dominic to choose the theme. He's done his own version of it for the Trial of a Time Lord season, which I remember being thrilled at because I noticed. I went, oh, that's new, and I loved that, and I bought the single. I bought the 12-inch, actually. But he also has now done some really sexy remixes of that and reversions of that, which I have just recently bought from the internet, and I'm sure you know how to buy things, and where to find them better than me just going, I went to that place called the cyberspace that you kids hang about in, and I managed to bag myself some bargains. But anyway, and I'm sure Dominic will plug, but I really like his Gallifrey remixes, and I like his theme very much. And I like his theme for Indefinable Magic, which he composed for me, very kindly offered his services, which is really nice. I like the way he describes how it was done musically, and because he knows the sort of technical side of things, and it's worth pointing out, of course, that that theme, which I have to say I'm not sure has been bettered. I mean, I love the same with the title sequences. I love the theme arrangements for the. I know it changes slightly when Troughton comes. It's got a bit more ooble woobles. That's what the music people told me to call it. No, I've just made it up. But I do love that original one. I find it so haunting, and I find it suits the title sequence so well as well. But also, was it cut to picture? I don't know that it was. These days you can cut music to picture really, really well. In fact, I remember when I went in to do some ADR on an episode of Holby City I was in, and they'd had to change the storyline quite hugely because there'd been a mistake, and they only realised when they edited it together, which meant I had to lose a couple of scenes, unfortunately, and my storyline had to be wrapped up in ADR. And I said to the sound guy, I said, that's a bit of a shame, that's a bit of a disaster. He said, oh, that's nothing, we've got a new exec, and she's commissioned a theme tune, but she sent the composer the wrong titles, so that they actually, he fitted the theme tune to cut to pictures that the theme tune, his composition didn't end up going on, because obviously you can do this stuff to the millisecond, which you certainly couldn't then. But I was going to say, when Dominic was saying that, how I envied the people who got to see it for the first time. Imagine being there and for the first time hearing that theme and going, what is that? And now I envy them in some senses. I don't envy them in the sense that if I'd been there at the time, I'd now be even older than I am now, and I feel ancient. And I'd probably have forgotten all sorts of other things. But I do remember when I first saw it, even though I'd seen, the Tom Baker titles by this point and watched a lot of Doctor Who, when this was part of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, I do remember it feeling like hallowed ground that I was being sort of sucked into when the Hartnell titles and music started. And it did feel very special and very haunting even then. Even though, and it seemed ancient then, it was only as long ago then as it's the equivalent of watching Rose now, pretty much, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Yeah, because it was 18. It's the equivalent of watching Rose now. And yet when I watched An Unearthly Child, it was ancient. It was before living memory. It was fusty. They may as well have got it from a crypt. And of course, William Hartnell at that point was the dead one. There was one dead Doctor Who, and it was William Hartnell. So it seemed like it was from another time. Well, I was a grown-up when Rose was on. Oh, the humanity! But I kind of love that. But it's also a bit frightening because Doctor Who travels through time, forwards, backwards, sideways. We only head in one direction, and I find that the further you go one direction, the faster you travel. So there's a cheery thought. But anyway, of course Dominic was going to choose the theme. I bloody love the theme. And I was also actually, because something I was thinking about when I rewatched it, just for fun, just for pleasure, without talking through it. I seem to recall I'd been quite rude about the live switch and saying that I didn't think that sound worked as well as good. Well, of course, having said that, I then looked at it this time and looked out for it and went, yeah, because I'm glad I picked up on that. So actually, that sound is not bad. I seem to think in my head, in my memory of it, it doesn't feel quite there, and it doesn't really sound like an electric shock, but it was much better than I thought. And also, of course, it's played in live, and it's pretty much bang on. It's bang on when it should be played in, and it cuts out quicker than I'd imagined, and it is actually more organic than I thought it was. But for some reason, I've always thought of that as a bit that was never quite right. And then, of course, as soon as I watch it this time around, having finally said that out loud, you go, oh, actually, no, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it at all. But the thing that did actually strike me as maybe being slightly wrong, after the brilliance of Barbara walking in, you then get Ian walk in, and the acting choice that William Russell makes is to sort of look behind him as if to say to Doctor Who, look, I'm a bit cross with you still, have you pushed me in here, or have I pushed past you? I'm still a bit cross with you. But he's already in, so he will have noticed the big spaceship thing. But he's decided to go, no, I'm still going to play this as though I'm annoyed with Doctor Who, even though I'm now in a massive spaceship, and then I shall notice the massive spaceship. But he needs to get that sort of reprimanding look behind him in first, which I do think is quite amusing. It doesn't quite work. I mean, it's tiny and it doesn't matter at all. But to reset that karmic balance is that watching that first scene between Ian and Barbara, they are so likeable and they are so good and they are so perky. She is so empathic. And he's got so many wonderful lines as well when he's in the junkyard and he says, oh, just before they enter, and she's going, oh, I'm full of foreboding. He goes, I just take things as they come. And it's worth keep saying this. The Ian in Coburn's scripts is a dick. He's like, oh God, women blooming drivers, and I should smack you on the nose, Dr. Space. I mean, he's really unpleasant, and sort of his wisecracky always sort of has an edge to it, or sort of macho belligerence that's really horrible. And thank God we have William Russell being, so perky and so likeable, and so. I mean, he is slightly paternalistic, but in a really enjoyable. There's a real warmth to him, and and it reminded me, because there's so many bits of Hartnell that I was noticing and going, oh yeah, I still feel bad for not choosing Hartnell but choosing the quartet. But then looking at William Russell without the need to be talking all the way through it, you're going, no, I was right to choose the quartet, because it really does require all four of them to be firing on all cylinders, and they really all absolutely are. That was nothing to do with what Dominic said, but it's just jumped into my head. He'll probably now say, and the thing I really like William Russell's warmth. So let's see what he says now. What's Dominic Lynn's number 2?
Number 2, the nostalgia. Although I was actually too young to have seen this episode, I was alive, but more than likely on the potty or strapped to my high chair, drooling baby food. But it's very much representative of my memories of how I felt my 1960s childhood seemed to be. Everything was in black and white. The 60s were in black and white, as you probably know. Saturday nights, which for me were Doctor Who, Dixon and Doc Green, the Telegoons, toasting crumpets on an open fire. It was always cold, it was always dark, so it seemed. This is what TV was like to me as a small boy. 405 lines in 4:3 ratio. coppers in helmets, pop music on tinny transistor radios. It's just so 60s.
Now, I obviously come from a slightly different angle because I wasn't alive during the 1960s, but I absolutely agree with the sentiment and can see that through my own lens, in the sense that, unlike going, I was sort of there, it makes me nostalgic for it. I'm nostalgic for the sort of memory of it. I was born in 74, but so the 60s were far away, but they seemed, they were a time that we looked back on, and they seemed like such an exciting time. And obviously my parents were relatively young in the 60s. My mum was born in 43, so my mum was 20 when Doctor Who went out, and it seemed like such a time of change and interest and actually anything but black and white. But I like the fact that the telly is in black and white, because it gives us that slight distance from it. And I don't mind that. I totally get one of the guests of this podcast, Ben Cook, has just done a brilliant job recolorizing the Daleks and reinventing that and cutting it and making it, giving a gateway to young viewers into it. I have no objection to that at all. I actually thought it was really nicely done, and in places, certainly the jumping of the ravine and the final scene with lasers flying about, I thought were actually much better and much, because I think that final episode of the Daleks climax isn't brilliantly directed in the original, and they tightened it up and really made it work. And the other thing is, even if it had been, it wouldn't matter, because we still have those 7 episodes, and nobody's saying that those 7 episodes are bad or there's anything wrong with them. And I love watching them black and white. I like the longer pace. I like spending more time with the characters and the little subplots of Antidus being fearful and Ganatus flirting with Barbara and all. I like all that. I find it charming and the ways that they use to tell the story and let it sort of tell itself over quite a long period of time, and the fact that they all that all that. But I also get the need to draw younger people in, because there's a lot of time between the 60s and kids now, much more than there was between the 60s and me when I was younger. And even it took me a while to get used to the different pace of old stories, and black and white seemed quite distant. Silent seemed like, I remember thinking, I can't watch silent movies, they're too old. Well, they're now old Doctor Who is the sort of equivalent of silent movies for this generation. So absolutely. But I do like the black and white, and I also like the fact that, and this does sadden me about today. I think that in our zeal to make this world a better place, and certainly I hear it in my kids, and obviously I observe the young on the social medias and all of that. There is a tendency to scold the past and to be cross with the past, and to think that everything that happened in the old days was done by either idiots or bad people. And we look back on the past with a certain sort of reverence that that they were the pathfinders to what we have today, and I'm sure they made mistakes along the way or whatever, but that they'd created many of the good things about the world that we had, rather than they were responsible for all the bad ones. And I thought that was a sort of, that's a more humble way to be, really, to me, that you appreciate the things that you've got were built on foundations laid by others. Now, of course, that also means that the bad things you've got were perhaps responsible for people outside of were outside of our control, so we should be cross with the people that were the cause of them. But I always think that's a bit like throwing stones, shaking your fist at the clouds or whatever. And I looked back at old stuff as though it was a sort of dusty, venerable tome, and I like that. And that's my equivalent of Dominic's nostalgia. For Dominic, it was something he sort of vaguely remembered and lived through. For me, it was something that I couldn't quite touch, because it was just separate from me. But because of that, it had a sort of hallowed aspect to it, and I rather liked feeling like that there was something that I could never touch or be a part of, but could now see and at least sort of relive or live, vicariously, if you like. But I had a sort of insight into it without ever having been able to touch it or walk through it, and that felt like a privilege, to have a lens into history, to understand it and to appreciate it, not to sort of go, oh yeah, we're all better than all the people in that, because that's not to me a way to be. I like nostalgia. I like looking back to things that are, because I find it quite humbling as well that it's gone. The only thing that keeps the past alive really is us, and we can take the lessons from it and try to put them into our own lives and be better ourselves. Well, yeah, that's what we should do with the past. But what we can also do is appreciate it on its own terms, and sort of I think it's quite humbling to keep all those. This is why I love the people from Doctor Who, because we kind of keep them alive, and I find it moving that those moments in time that were as real to them as they were doing them as this moment is to me now, and I can see the colours that I can see, and I can smell the smells I can see, and when I'm talking to the people I'm talking to, they're there with me and present, we have that energy, and all that was happening in those black and white pictures that we see now. But the moment is gone. The actual reality of that moment is gone, but what that moment created and what those people created is still ever present. And those people are either dead or now old. William Russell was 99 the other week, but there he is, aged 39, 40, being brilliant and charming and lovable, and always will be. But he was there and doing it, and I find it a real privilege that the modern age has enabled us to watch those moments captured. And I think it's even more so when it's something like a 60s television production, because it was sort of put together as you were seeing it. Anything made now, yes, the scenes you see were live and present where they were shot, but actually they're probably made up of various different takes, lots of post-production. Sometimes people weren't there on the same. Well, a prime example is the ending to An Adventure in Space and Time that we've just seen. It was beautiful. David Bradley as William Hartnell seeing Ncuti Gatwa, who we still haven't properly seen as Doctor Who, and I thought that was lovely. But also, I know they weren't there in the same room. Do you know what I mean? That's because we can do it all by magic now. They had a different kind of magic in the 60s, and the magic is that we are kind of there with them doing it. And what we see is what they did, pretty much unaltered, because there weren't any ways to alter it. And I find that rather magical as well. So my nostalgia is different from Dominic's, but I think nostalgia is extremely powerful. And it's a contrary thing, because I'm nostalgic for my childhood, even though I didn't particularly enjoy it. I wasn't very happy in my childhood, and yet, we've got a plastic jug here that I won't throw away, because it was a plastic jug that we had in my home, and it reminds me of the home in the kitchen at my mum's house, in the 80s or whatever. But I wasn't particularly happy in that kitchen, but it's somehow a relic of the past that, I suppose, because I got through it, it makes me feel safe, or because it connects me with the kid. And you think now, oh God, when I was a kid, I didn't actually really have any worries, and God, I was in, and wasn't it nice to be so innocent and to be so full of wonder and all of those things that you lose as adulthood sort of creeps into you and seeps into your bones and smooths out your edges and flattens out your emotions a bit, and maybe it's that connection with what one once was, and I find that quite moving as well. I'm desperately pretentious, and I talk a lot of shit about what is essentially an old television program, but this is what you saw. This is your fault. You're the ones listening, however many of you there are. This is what you saw. I've got the man who rearranged the Doctor Who theme for the Trial of a Time Lord season. What a special guest, giving us his personal and professional insight, and you've got me wanging on about a plastic jug that I can't throw away. Oh God, anyway, right. Dominic's third thing.
Number 3, the atmosphere. Director Waris Hussein managed to create the most incredible spookiness on a budget of 5 guineas and sixpence or thereabouts. It's just so dark, foggy and oppressive. The entire episode feels ominous and scary without there being any monsters or alien threat. It's simply the unease that we feel at the juxtaposition of 2 ordinary English teachers from 1963 and the 2 weird and mysterious travellers from who knows where and when.
It really is atmospheric. And I funny going into this, I was thinking of Warris Hussein's roving camera that was going to be one of my stars as well, because, and again, looking at it again without talking through it, it's that inky blackness and the black and white. It is more black and white, and it is beautiful, and it really is atmospheric. All of that stuff, because it's at night, and we don't often get Doctor Who. We don't get Doctor Who at night as often as we should, really, because night filming was really hard. It's not so hard in a studio, which this episode entirely is. But those night scenes, and there's not many of them, but I love that shot just of Susan entering the junkyard. It's tiny, but because she's in the costume and because it's nighttime, because it's such a good set, and it's a moment that you don't really think about because there's so many other sort of hugely iconic moments in it. And I use iconic in the proper sense of the word, not throw it about willy-nilly. So it's as, in sentences and television shows these days, it's as ubiquitous as salted caramel and pulled pork on menus. You'll be able to date anything from 2022, 2023 for pulled pork, salted caramel, the use of the word iconic, and drone shots in documentaries. Anyway, I think it is truly atmospheric, and I love it when Doctor Who does drippy atmosphere, and there aren't many installments of Doctor Who as atmospheric as that first one, and all it is some people, looking around a junkyard. It's or hanging outside of one in a car. Yeah, it's got a great atmosphere.
Number 4, the gripping nature of the plot and script. Watching this again, I felt myself hanging on every word, totally engaged and enthralled. At the end of the episode, who could possibly not want to watch the next episode to find out what happens? It's just such a shame that the rest of the story is more than a little dull in comparison. This episode, however, never lets us down. Edge of the seat stuff in a quiet, thoughtful way, just ever so slightly menacing and never boring.
Oh, I think every word of it is perfect. And it's funny watching it again without talking through it. I made a mistake about the rock and roll years. Have I said this already? Oh, it's late. I'm so tired. Have you ever thought what it's like to be Wonder comes after Ian's Ridiculous? I think I have already said that. Oh no, I'm being repetitive. But if I've said it once, I'll say it again. The episode was repeated, so I'm only being appropriate. But also what I noticed is that it's not just Susan and I are cut off from our own people without friends. He also does the one day we shall get back, yes, one day, which is wistful and longing, and again suggests, it helps with that sense that they're cut off and they're lonely travellers, and that they're, that they're in trouble. And of course the line that comes before it, I tolerate this century, but I don't enjoy it. There's so much in that line as well. So it's not just the classics, Wanderers in the Fourth Dimension and all of that. There are so many really, really good lines that are so, the economy of it, and that's all what Dominic is alluding to, the way that this episode unfolds and where the mystery leads us, and how it's all filled in largely through dialogue and character. Is a real lesson in top-notch writing and structure, and it's perfect. I don't think I'd change a line.
Number 5, William Hartnell's performance. It might be a bit unfair to say that possibly the first Doctor's greatest performance was in episode 1 of season 1, and that it all goes a bit downhill afterwards. But there is no denying William Hartnell is magnificent in this episode. Mesmerising and weird, a little frightening, but tender and caring too when addressing his granddaughter. It's really quite a nuanced performance. We all know, with hindsight, that he's not a bad guy at all, but viewing this for the first time, nobody would know anything about the lead character. Hartnell keeps us guessing with a complex portrayal of a dark and alien character, delivering his lines with confidence and really nailing the role of a grumpy, crotchety old man from another time and place. All in all, for me, this is actually one of Doctor Who's greatest episodes ever, and I can't quite believe this was produced 60 years ago. What a classic.
Ah, well, thank you, Dominic. And he didn't plug his music. So I will do that. But yeah, I mean, we've covered why I chose Everybody and not Hartnell on his own. But Hartnell is really, really good, and again, watching it then, it's that faint smile. I used to be of the opinion, it is one of his best performances, if not his best. But he gives some other really good performances in the run. Some as some quite late on as well. I think he's extraordinary in Master Plan 12. He's not in it that much, and his final speech in The Massacre is actually one of those things that you read about and went, oh, but that's amazing, and then you'd see quite a few of those things and go, oh, it's actually not that amazing. But the Massacre speech is I think very well, very very that good, and that's quite late. That's quite late on, and when he is starting to struggle a bit, but. And I used to think, oh, it's a shame I don't quite like the hooting Hartnell Doctor, because I'd been told he was irascible. I told the Doctor was a crotchety, grumpy guy. But the Doctor doesn't work entirely as a crotchety, grumpy person as the series goes on. He wouldn't have been followed around by kids like the Pied Piper, as he said it. That beautiful scene in Adventure in Space and Time, which has just been on as well, when he's in the park and he thaws because the guy that hated children suddenly finds out that being magical to them is such a rewarding thing. If he'd continued to be so grumpy, and again, these days, we have this idea that, or maybe things have changed, and that's fine as well. That kids can't possibly identify with somebody who isn't like them or whatever. Well, kids love wizards and magicians and again, it's that thing of old wisdom. If we allow it, if we showcase it, we're quite ageist now, and I wonder if in 20 years' time we'll look back and go, why weren't heroes allowed to be old? Why weren't we, or fat? But let's not get into that. We all, it's only when you come out of something and look back on it and go, why did we do like that then? And there are certain things being done now by, good people with the best intentions that will form a pattern that in 20 years' time will make us look and go, oh, actually, looking at that from a distance, that's a bit strange, or that doesn't quite work, or that needed readdressing or rebalancing. And I'm not aiming that at anything particular or anyone particular now, but I'm just talking about the passage of time and why we must always be wise about our own complacency, because some of our things and some of the things that as I say, the very best people who think they're the very best people will be shown up to have their own inherent problems, which is why I always give the past a little bit of a break. But it was when season 2 came out on Blu-ray, and I had cause to and doing some of these Happy Times and Places, and had cause to watch Hartnell stories, which I had to say when I started getting them on bootleg and stuff, they were largely a little bit disappointing because of course they weren't what I'd imagined in my head, and it took me a while, a few rewatches, like 7 or 8, to sort of accept them on their own terms. And in fact, some of those I've only really done recently, as I've learnt to be a bit less cross about things, shortcomings, and more accept them on their own terms. And stories that I'd previously sort of thought of, overrated or needed, pulling down a notch or two, because I would also always up the underdog and have things to say about the ones that everybody else likes, because that's the kind of conceited and vain that I am. Like the Time Meddler, watching at the BFI with a load of Doctor Who fans, where I'd always been like, oh, boring. The Saxons and the Vikings aren't very good. Peter Butterworth and the sets are the only really good things about it. And you just go, no, it's utterly charming. It's brilliant. I love all of these people. I love the vibe and the atmosphere and the chemistry and the production on its own terms and the jokes and all of that. And I found 60s Doctor Who, especially Hartnell Doctor Who, much more charming than I'd ever found it before, particularly that second season, where a lot of the stories I've been down on because they're not they'd not fitted in with my imagination of what they should be from having read the Target books or Doctor Who magazine or whatever. And the early years was it brilliant black and white photographs that make everything look like a sort of majestic movie, which it's those dark grainy black and whites, blown up beautifully and big and looking fantastic. That actually look a bit better than the slightly shaky, the mobile episodes, because as soon as you start moving around, things clatter and shake and crunch and whatever. But I find giggly Dotty Grandad Hartnell not a disappointing diminution of the strange enigma, slightly sort of threatening, slightly malevolent. I mean, those eyes, the way they dart around with an almost calculating, malevolent intelligence is wonderful. And it's great for this first episode. But actually, I'm quite pleased that he became, Dotty Uncle Who, if you like. And he fits that very, very well. And it's obviously, having seen him in that footage where he is himself, in that local news footage that was tracked down by, I think it was Richard Bignell, which I first saw on the set of An Adventure in Space and Time, because when I was talking to David Bradley, I said, have you actually seen much of the old Who, and have you seen much of William Hartnell? And we were talking about how they'd found this stuff, and he said, oh yeah, I've got that, have you not seen it? And I said, no, I think it's coming out on a DVD soon, but I haven't seen it. And he said, oh, I've got it on and he gave me his tablet and let me watch it. Bless him. So he was holding the tablet and I was watching it on his tablet, so I had David Bradley as William Hartnell over my shoulder as I watched William Hartnell, and the only thing we've got of him visually being William Hartnell, and aren't I a lucky boy? But that William Hartnell, I'm a legitimate character actor, is not Dotty Uncle Who. Do you know what I mean? He's much more like a sort of pugnacious boxery type than he is a scatterbrained space wizard. Thanks, Dominic. So Dominic has he's got a mini album coming out called Survival: The Remixes, and he's put the Indefinable Magic theme as a bonus track on it. So I'm plugging that now. I love all of Dominic's music for Doctor Who. I think his Survival music is fantastic. I think his Dragonfire music is fantastic. I think his Trial music is gorgeous. So I think his scores are frequently the strongest in the strongest things, among the strongest things about his stories. And what have I done? I've done Survival, haven't I? And I've done Dragonfire, and I think I nominated his scores as the best things in both of those. And I suspect I will in Mysterious Planet as well, because I think his music is really, really terrific. And so I'm happy to plug that, whether he's been on this or not. And also, which he hasn't asked me to plug, the Gallifrey remixes, which have been out a while, but I had cause to get them the other day, not long before he emailed me. I just heard them on something, thought, oh, I've never bought those, and they're terrific. So, before we go into New Who, because I have people from New Who, I've got some illustrious people from New Who, which I'm quite pleased about. I mean, obviously my childhood self is, oh God, I've got all these people from Doctor Who in the olden days, and that's where my heart lies. But I would feel sad if I was not remote. I see New Who as equally sort of out of my reach, because it's made by big movers and shakers and blah blah. And I can understand if Katie Manning and Nicola Bryant are nice to me, because I've met them loads, and we've been at the same things and in the same green rooms. But people from New Who and modern television, and they're a bit and yet a lot of them have been very kind and contributed. But before that, this chap bridges the gap between those, because he is an incredibly experienced and illustrious writer of modern television, but has not written a modern Doctor Who, but has written for the modern Doctor Who universe, but is a prolific TV writer, and also has done some groundbreaking Big Finish stuff, not just Doctor Who. He's also a delightful mind, funny chap, great company, and is responsible for a connection that I have with this episode that I wonder if he will bring up in his choice of 5 things. I suspect he might, which will mean another addition to a surprising aspect of this that is it's an aspect of this that is flourishing in the favourite stakes somewhat surprisingly. But let's see if, 1, he says who he is and what he's done, and 2, if one of the things he chooses is the thing that I'm alluding to. So let's hear from him.
Hi Toby, Joe Lidster here, and here are my top 5 things about episode 1 of Doctor Who and An Unearthly Child. Number 1 is William Russell. Jacqueline Hill is obviously amazing, and we all love Barbara, but I think William Russell's performance can sometimes be overlooked. It's just so good. He takes a character who has the potential to be sexist or at least misogynistic, mocking Barbara for her fears. You know, he's the square-jawed hero, but he plays it so jokily. He's really funny and charming. Barbara's a little bit colder at the moment. She doesn't know who John Smith and the Common Men are, but he's so much fun and so curious, and I want to spend time with him. And I think that sets up the blueprint for what a Doctor Who companion should be, someone we want to spend time with.
So there we are. Isn't that... So, well, 1, he didn't say what he does, and 2... he gave me the perfect point to discuss how warm and twinkly and brilliant William Russell is, but I did that after Dominic Glynn had chosen the theme tune, so that means I should learn to shut up sometimes. So imagine I said all that about Ian just now as a response to Joe's point. That would have been effective, wouldn't it? Joe, I'm sure you know him. He wrote the breakthrough Big Finish, The Rapture, that's just seemed like the coolest thing ever when I was a kid listening to Big Finish. It seemed like, you know, it was thoroughly modern. And he's also wrote Master, which is one of the very best Big Finishes. But of course, he's done so much television: The Demon Head Master and Wizards vs. Aliens, as well as Torchwood, as well as the Sarah Jane Adventures. He's very much steeped in Doctor Who mythology, but also steeped in the world of professional television writing, and is very skilled. But he's also a hoot and good company, and I concur with his choice of William Russell. But of course, I cheated because I have him as part of the quartet. What is Joe's second thing?
Number 2, I love the fact that we follow the teachers, that they're our identification characters. If it was being made now, we'd absolutely get the note, make Susan the main character, make her feisty. I think it helps confirm that it's not just a show for children, but for the whole family. And it's just a bit cleverer. I think it's a really interesting choice, because it's, imagine your teachers having lives or interests and jokes and then getting into adventures. That's really unearthly.
Very good, and that's interesting coming from somebody who writes a lot of modern television, saying that your note, if you were to write this today, would actually ruin it. Which and I find this a lot where I'll talk to somebody who's written something and go, I didn't quite like that, and they go, yeah, well, we didn't have it like that, but then we were told from on high to do that because that's how we do things these days. Not because it will make the story better almost, but it actually sometimes makes the storytelling a lot harder because somebody's gone, no, you've got to do this instead. You go, but hang on, that doesn't just change this, it unravels everything I've carefully put in place. But the fact that we follow the teachers and Susan is the mystery, and then that mystery leads to the Doctor, is key to its success. And yes, also, we might find it a little quaint these days that, our identification figures in the first 12 minutes of this children's drama adventure is two rather sort of, liberal Democrat. I know there was no such thing in 1963. Lib Dem school teachers who are, one of whom is a bit down with the kids, and one of whom is a bit sort of matronly concerned. But actually, yeah, they are so likable, and the fact that one is a science teacher and one is a history teacher, and they both have their different perspectives on Susan, which show us the different elements of her unearthliness. It's not just that she's sophisticated, it's that she's unsophisticated as well, which is clever and makes it multi-layered. And yeah, it's it's a superb choice to tell it that way, and the fact that they're both teachers and is essential to that. What is Joe's third thing?
Shady Sal. So during the lockdown, I did a quiz round for the Quiz of Rassilon, which led to me giving nicknames to the kids in the background, because it's the same bunch of extras in each scene. There's No Chair Steve, because he's always standing in the back of shots. And you then went hunting for them. And I'm very happy to have been involved in something like that. My own little contribution to Doctor Who.
Oh, you've had more of a contribution to Doctor Who than I have, Joe. But we did this quiz. And Joe did a load of questions about An Unearthly Child, and one of the questions was, how many people do we see in the story, in the episode? And of course, it's the policeman, and then the four main characters, and the shadow, and then the school kids, and there are 7 of them. And to illustrate the fact that there are 7 of them, and it's the same 7 in every scene, he named them all. And Shady Sal is the one who sort of whispers about Kenneth Williams and raises her eyebrow in a very sexy way. That's Carol Clark, aka Carol Friday, aka Caroline Villiers. She worked under a lot of different names. She's in the video for Gypsies, Tramps and Thieves by Cher, and had a recording deal, and played at the West End. Kenneth Williams, I've told you a bit about. Richard Wilson, later Richard Alexander. Double L Wilson, not Victor Meldrew, Richard Wilson. Ended up being a pub landlord, but kept his hand in with theatre, is in To Sir With Love. Heather Lyons, who's the first one, who's pretty much the first one we see coming out of the corridor, with those amazing eyes. I've seen a picture of her today, and she's still got those, sparkling eyes. And she was interviewed a few years ago. I couldn't get an interview out of her, but she's still around. And No Chair Steve is actually Cedric Schumann, who is still about as well, but he lives in Zambia or South Africa or somewhere. And I emailed back and forth with Cedric and with his sons, and he's No Chair Steve. And that was pretty much one of the few things he did in this country before hopping back, and so he didn't really know anything about Doctor Who or its place in the pantheon or anything like that, and he's lived a long and interesting life that has nothing to do with theatre or television or any of that stuff. So, but look, there's more of that in my, if you haven't heard it, my Far Too Much Information podcast, which is available for all to hear on iTunes. It's part of season 4, Class of 63 Revisited. And it was, I think Clayton Hickman had tweeted, you should try and find them or something, and I hadn't really taken it seriously. And then a few years later, this Joe did this quiz, and then I was thinking of something to do for the 58th anniversary, and I thought, well, let's see if I can find them. And at that point, I found them all bar Kenneth Williams and the Lonely Blonde, who you don't see that much, but she's in the standing up at the back with No Chair Steve when everyone's laughing at Susan. And then I found out about Kenneth Williams through the chants that I've told you about earlier. And then I finally found The Lonely Blonde by a bit of dogginess, with a little help from Richard Bignell, who had a suggestion as to somebody who might be her sister. So I wrote to her sister, and then she finally got in touch with me, and she has a completely different name now. So it's no wonder I couldn't find her. But we've exchanged back and forths. And I mean, a totally daft and irrelevant endeavour. But I do have a sense of achievement for having done that, even though it's completely pointless. The fact was, I set myself a task and I completed it. And I don't always complete or succeed in all of the things I do. In fact, I have a great sense of a lack of succeeding in most areas. But that one, I can say I pulled off. So thanks, Joe, and I'm glad that it tickles you, because if it didn't tickle you, I mean, it really was a completely pointless endeavour.
Number 4, I love the opening. The fog, the policeman, the junkyard, humming police box. It's just really atmospheric. And I just think being a kid in 1963 and sitting down to watch that, it must have been amazing. And what I really love about the police box is that it's so subtle as well. It's just this mysterious hum, not loads of weird computer noises. So you can imagine sort of older kids getting closer to the telly to check. Can you hear that? Yeah, there's definitely something. It's just brilliant.
And that's so the school children and the opening, I think, are currently streets ahead of everything else. I'm really pleased about the opening, but I think I've said all there is to say about it. Although it was the bell clanging that got me this time. Just that bell in the distance that just gives it a little bit of something.
And number 5, and possibly my favourite thing about it, is the absolute pace of the storytelling. 2 minutes, literally 2 minutes into it, and Ian and Barbara are talking about how Susan worries them, about how she lets her knowledge out bit by bit. The economy of the storytelling is brilliant. They're straight into it. Then Ian says, Barbara says Susan's grandfather doesn't like strangers at home, and Ian says he's a doctor, isn't he? And again, you're watching it knowing what the title of the show is. 6 minutes in, and Ian and Barbara are at the junkyard. It's just really, really well paced, and I think it should be shown to anyone making adult TV today, to get on with it. And can I award myself a bonus one? Number 6, Ian and Barbara's exchange of "not gone yet, obviously not," which is just brilliant. Hooray! And if you want to know anything about what I'm up to, follow me on Twitter. I'm Joseph_Lidster. Done.
Thanks, Joe. I do like Joe. I don't like an underscore, though. It's a terrible thing. I really don't like an underscore in an email address or a Twitter thing, because underscores don't come easily to me, and you can't always see them if they're written down, especially if the email address has been, underlined, as they are when they're sometimes written down, because that's how they format themselves. And then if somebody writes them down in pen, in handwriting, you don't know if it's an underscore or a dash. I'm not a fan of the underscore. I'll forgive you, though, Joe. I actually have a pathological hatred of the underscore. If somebody has an underscore in their email address, it makes me quite bothered. But I will forgive Joe, because I like him so very much, and he always responds to my messages and the things I ask him to do, and I don't know why, because he's and he always seems happy to chat when we end up in a pub together or whatever, because he's quite an achiever, and as I say, I love you with an iPhone, but I never feel like I'm being sort of put up with, which I sometimes feel when people who've done things are talking to me. But he always makes me feel like he doesn't really mind. It's probably because he's usually smashed. And it probably makes me more interesting than I actually am. But I'm genuinely fond of Joe, and I'm really pleased he did that. And I knew he'd give us good insight, and he is responsible for that far too much information. And I'm glad he enjoys that association. Right. It's about time we moved on to New Who. I am not just a lover of old Who, even though that's the one I've delved into the minutiae of, and I'm sure it will be left to others to, cover New Who in the sort of detail that I and many others, and proper researchers too. I'm not singling myself out here, but I'm talking about where I put my energies tend to be, into those old actors, partially because time is running out, but also partially because they're from the times that I was growing up in, so I think I've got a bit of an angle, and I remember spotting them in things when I was a kid, so that helps with my any sort of research or touch points that I have. But that doesn't mean I don't like New Who. That doesn't mean I don't try and spot the actors from it in other things and try and find out trivia about it and all that. But as I get older, I find less stuff is retained and less stuff stays in my head. And also, I like coming to New Who episodes that I haven't seen unspoiled, because I'm so familiar with so many other aspects of Doctor Who. It's nice for Doctor Who to be fresh and new. So I don't read all the I certainly used to when Doctor Who magazine was doing the previews of certainly the Eccleston and Tennant episodes. I was watching programs in the week to get any clip that I possibly could in order to, get those. I used to watch Totally Doctor Who. My friend John was chortling the other day because he didn't watch Totally Doctor Who because, as he said, it's for kids. Yeah, it was for kids, but it would always have a clip of the episode coming up in the week. So I would tape it. I've got them all on VHS upstairs, home taped Totally Doctor Who, because I knew I'd get a clip. I'd get a sort of preview of Saturday's episode. Whereas now I tend to sort of go, actually, I might stay fresh. Actually, I quite like. I'll watch the next time trailer if it's part of the episode, but I don't have a hankering to see exclusive clips on the One Show or anything like that, because I feel I quite like to come to them fresh. And that's also, it's a different kind of excitement for me. But I think I'm just saying this to underline the fact that much as I, am all over Classic Who and I adore it and nostalgic for it, I am no rejecter of New Who. I've been as excited as I've ever been by developments in post 2005 Doctor Who, as scared, as spooked and impressed as I've ever been. I don't think I've ever been quite as spooked or as thrilled at how spooky a Doctor Who scene was as I was by the don't turn around Toby. And it's not just because it's not just because he's called Toby, not at all that he's called Toby in The Impossible Planet, and the thrill of David Tennant's fake teased regeneration at the end of The Stolen Earth, the Bad Wolf reveal in Turn Left. There's so many moments like that in New Who. The Daleks appearing at the end of Army of Ghosts that have got me, even the macro in Gridlock, that have got me sort of punching the air and really thrilled and excited. And I think what I love about New Who is it sort of keeps me in touch with that kid who was, who's now completely vanished, but perhaps his DNA or a little bit of his essence is in that plastic jug. So maybe it's a way of keeping me in touch with him as well. So New Who is perhaps my plastic jug, but it's rather more exciting. So I just wanted, so I'm thrilled that I've been able to reach out to some people with an association with New who are of course fans themselves and who have their own take on An Unearthly Child, one of whom actually was going to do this and then said, look, I've thought about it. I haven't got anything original. I said, I don't care if it's original. I just want you. And I do want him. And he's the writer of some of my favourite bits of Modern Who. So with the warning that he doesn't think he's got anything original to say, but actually, I mean, lots of people trying to be original have missed out things that he's now going to say for the first time. Who knows? But let's see if he introduces himself. I hope so.
Hi, I'm Paul. Books, comics, games, television, all sorts of things. And my favourite things about An Unearthly Child are, I would say the fact that with the very first thing in it being a Kenneth Williams impersonation, Doctor Who is tied into pop culture from moment one.
Well, two things notable about that. Excellent writer, but obviously slightly fluffing his intro there, or I don't know, it sounded like his phone microphone was being removed from a sock. But it is, so if you didn't hear that, it's Paul Cornell, the writer of Father's Day and Human Nature, Family of Blood, which are some of my favourite instalments of all Doctor Who. And he's also, of course, he was the fan writer that everyone revered back in the day, and of course he was instrumental in the New Adventures and has flourished outside of Doctor Who as well, and also scored the highest score last week in the whole of the Cricket Draft Fantasy Cricket League. I know that because I play a little game with him and a few others, and I actually won the World Cup league in our mini league that we have, but Paul's individual score last week was the highest of anybody in the whole competition, not just anybody in our league, which is an extraordinary achievement, but pales in significance to his TV writing career. So I interesting because I don't read Kenneth Williams, aka Richard Wilson 2Ls, as doing a Kenneth Williams impression. I think he's just acting and going, oh, look at that. And it just sounds to us like Kenneth Williams, and we've imposed Kenneth Williams upon him. But maybe it is deliberate. Maybe he's deliberately doing Kenneth Williams. I hadn't thought of that. I thought that was just how he comes across to us. But that's an interesting take from Paul, that actually he's aping that actor from the not very many at that point Carry On films. I still think I am right, but I will take Paul's version, because we can have an alternative universe where that is the case.
I love the efforts to make the thought patterns of the cave people different I'm sure we're a long way from any true representation of what actual cave people would be like, but the idea that maybe these people are Neanderthals, who knows?
Now, I clearly didn't explain to Paul well enough that we were just doing the first episode, but that's okay. Because if An Unearthly Child taught us anything, is that sometimes mistakes being in things make them very interesting indeed. So this is something that when Sidney Newman watches this Happy Times and Places back, he'll say, lose the references to the Caves People's episodes. They're nuts. But I will take responsibility for that. And I agree with that, but you'll need to listen to Jim Sangster and I podcasting about the Tribe of Gum in previous instalments of Happy Times and Places. Let's see if any of the rest of Paul's things are about the first episode. I mean, it doesn't matter, does it? He's still very interesting to hear from.
I like the fact that Doctor Who is literally Promethean from moment one, that he gives them fire so that they can become a civilization.
Okay, no, we're still in Cavemansville, but that's okay. He does indeed give them fire, but does that mean he is responsible ultimately for the fact that we can now create fire that will, as the old mother said, kill us all in the end? Oh, so maybe the Doctor is the saviour of the human race, but also the person who gives us our instruments of our own destruction.
I love the fact that in the extended version, not the extended version, I love the fact that in the pilot version, Susan does some ink on paper pressings that actually echo and look like the title sequence. That's deeply groovy, and I wish they'd kept it.
Now, that's interesting, isn't it? They say in a Rorschach pattern, and this is the Rorschach pattern that is not in the transmitted version of An Unearthly Child, but is in the pilot. It has been alluded to before in this commentary. I mentioned it. No, I think first it was mentioned. I can't remember who mentioned it now because my brain is atrophied. But it was mentioned in terms of it being the light, it being the light of the TARDIS. And I said, no, I thought it was the console. And Paul saying, no, it's the title sequence, it's the signal howl round. So that just goes to show that a Rorschach pattern that I've always assumed showed one thing, shows something completely different to the two other people who've mentioned it in this commentary. And of course, perhaps therefore justifies Sidney Newman's edict to change it, because it's really not clear what she sees, because he didn't see anything. He didn't see any of those three things because he didn't get what it was at all. Some of Sidney Newman's notes aren't great, by the way. Some of the ones on the Aztecs I think are quite annoying. But we might get to that when we do the Aztecs. So, his famous notes about nuts, we need a girl to get into trouble. Well, there's one bit with the Aztecs where at the end of episode 1, he says, John Ringham fluffs his line there. And it's like, well, yeah. We know that, mate. That's a typical exec pointing out the bleeding obvious. You go, yeah, we know that, mate, but we can't stop and go back for a fluff. So what do you want us to do? Just say, send you a note and say, by the way, he fluffs. We know that, you know that, but we can't do anything about it. So what's pointing it out is it's pointless and annoying. You think we didn't notice that, mate? That's not what we come to you for. But anyway, yeah, he didn't get what the Rorschach was at all. He didn't see any of the three things that each of us has seen. I still think I'm right, but Paul sees the title sequence. That's interesting, and that's the third mention then of something that isn't even in this episode, which might the Rorschach picture might have got more mentions than William Hartnell. See, this is why Doctor Who is such a treasure trove.
And I love just the immense relatable chemistry of Ian and Barbara. What great leads those two were. Anyway, that's me. And I can be found at paulcornell.com, where you can see all of my doings. And, of course, I'm the co-host of Hammer House of Podcast.
Oh, yeah. Check out Hammer House of Podcast. Paul is very good at everything that he does, and is a proper fan. And always gives really smart observations. But for me, the real excitement here is going, this guy who wrote 3 magnificent episodes of New Who, 3 benchmark episodes of New Who, and of course Human Nature is based on New Adventures as well, which because it was a new adventure that made such an impact too, has come onto my podcast to celebrate with me and you 60 years of Doctor Who. Isn't that joyous? I hope Paul writes some more Doctor Who. I really do. So let's now go to more recent Who. I mean, really, we're coming really up to date, actually. We've got a couple more writers. I like writers. Writers are interesting, aren't they? And it's not just because Paul I met at an event at the Museum of Science and Industry here. It was where I also met Rob Shearman. And I became very good friends with Rob, and I've hung out with Paul as well. Haven't seen Paul in a while, though, unfortunately. So it's very nice that he's done this. But actually, the next contributor I've never actually met. We follow each other on Twitter. We've had cause to go a bit back and forth. The episode this writer of Doctor Who is responsible for is I think amongst my favourites of the era that it was written for. I think it's a really good episode. I really like it. I think it works in terms of its wit, in terms of the way that the science fiction and the events and the story is weaved into the show's format. And I really, really enjoyed it. But I've never met this person. They have no reason to be on this podcast at all, apart from the fact that I asked them and they said yes. So let's see if there's an introduction. But there will definitely be 5 things. I wonder what they'll be.
Hi, I'm Joy Wilkinson, writer of The Witchfinders and Whatnot, and 5 things that I love about the very first episode, An Unearthly Child, include number 1, the visuals. I'm constantly impressed by what they managed to get in that frame and some of the fab focus pulling in the car, but the opening scene encapsulates it for me. The mystery of that gothic fog and the POV with the policeman tantalising withholding, but then going through the door without him and getting that privileged glimpse of the police box. What's it doing there? It's a cracking start. I love doors, closed doors, sneaking through doors. We'll come back to doors later.
Oh, I've never actually even spoken to Joy. That's the first time I've heard her voice. And I'm thrilled that she's on. Thanks, Joy. That's given me a lot of joy. And has chosen the beginning. And I love the way she said the Witchfinders and Whatnot. It's such a good episode, though. It really is exactly how you should use a historical setting in a Doctor Who story, and exactly how you should use your threat to have a I think the alien menace is seeded so cleverly, so artfully into the story, and it's got a big chomping guest part that is good enough to attract an actor like Alan Cumming. So I think it's a terrific episode all round. The Witchfinders. And I might watch it after I've done this, because I haven't seen it for a while. She has chosen the beginning, but of course, being a clever writer, has expressed it in a novel and interesting way. But we have that beginning again, which I think is proving to be the most popular thing of the episode, which is really which I like, because it was one of the things that I chose. So it makes me feel like I'm not totally out of step. But I also wasn't sure. That wasn't on my list of things that I thought. Well, I didn't have a list, but the little sort of occasional thought in the back of my head that I thought everybody would choose. I wasn't sure that they would choose that, but it's proving to be very popular, which I'm happy about.
Number 2, I love the genius combination of the history and the science teachers, placing those subjects at the heart of the show. It's hard to imagine anything so academic happening in TV now, but it's perfect, especially as they're not there to be teachers, but to learn and have their minds blown. Kids would love that. So do I.
Now, that's the second person who said, this is a brilliant thing, and we wouldn't be allowed to do that in television today. What does this tell us about television today? But then again, listen, that's such a knee-jerk thing to do. Actually, I've learnt to stop doing that most of the time. I'm being performative here. I always used to invoke old Doctor Who, and I would want to invoke it to or to big it up, and to do so, I would do it at the expense of modern things. I go, oh well, you can't tell stories through character these days, or things aren't rehearsed as much these days, so they're not as good. Actually, there's a lot of modern television which is really, really good. There's a lot of modern television, and it's not all American. There's a lot of modern British television that's really, really good. The quality of acting, because I talk to actors, and I always sort of, we get nostalgic and go, oh, but you had 5 days rehearsal at the Acton Hilton, and it meant that the performances were so much better. I love the performances in old telly, but there's some damn good performances in new telly, and it's just a different way of doing it. And the really good actors these days, they do their homework, and they come really, really prepared, and they do their work at home, and are used to working a lot quicker, and have to be pretty spontaneous with the little bits of magic that perhaps might have taken a couple of days to work out in rehearsals or whatever. But I did note with interest, saying you wouldn't be able to do that in modern television. Well, that's worth noting, but it doesn't mean. But I don't want to be that guy who goes yes, which means that all modern things are bad and only old things are good. It's a bit like the way I used to go, Doctor Who's good, so Star Trek and Star Wars are rubbish because Doctor Who's better. No, Star Trek and Star Wars are great, but Doctor Who's great as well. And I used to always have to kind of big up Doctor Who at the expense of something else in order to make my thing more important. And we do that as people as well. You sort of, and I think that way madness lies. Something that you like, or even you. I was thinking about this today in terms of, a couple of jobs that I haven't got maybe, and sort of go, which means that casting director's an arsehole, and you go, actually they're not, because they cast that and they cast that person in that, and in fact I know somebody who knows them who says they're really, really nice. It might just be that they didn't think I was right for that part, and they might cast me in 10 years' time in something else, or they might not, but they still don't have to have shortcomings in order not to have given me what I wanted. Do you know what I mean? I think we sometimes always try and buy our thing or our point of view at the expense of somebody else's, and it could be that the two things are true. That I can still be a good actor and not be cast by that casting director, and that casting director not be a bad casting director. Sometimes it's taste, sometimes it's chemistry, sometimes you might not even be on their radar or whatever. But it doesn't always have to be one good, one bad. Me good, person disagrees with me bad. Actually, the person that disagrees with me might have perfectly valid reasons for disagreeing and still be a good person. But we've just come from different perspectives. So in the same way that I took, it wasn't bait because it wasn't intended to be dangled like that, but I took both of those mentions of going, we probably wouldn't be allowed to tell this story today. But go, because all telly is modern telly. It's made by blooming idiots. Well, it clearly isn't. There are different ways that we do things, and they still produce, in many cases, some excellent telly. And some right load of old tits. But there's a lot of television in the 1960s that was made in that beautiful way where they script edit and they tell things and they have an intellectual thrust and 5 days rehearsal that are still a load of old tits. So, I was just self-medicating there, going, don't yield to that temptation to go, because I like a thing done a certain way doesn't mean a thing that's done a different way is bad. But I do note with interest that two writers have highlighted the brilliant thing, which is the storytelling through the teachers, as something that you wouldn't be allowed to do today. But then again, writing and creation flourishes under limitations. And perhaps if one of the limitations is to go, well, you can't tell it that way now, means you have to be inventive and tell it in another way. And that necessary invention could lead to something amazing. So it's how you respond to the limitations imposed, which Doctor Who itself did, different limitations, back in the 60s.
Number 3, my favourite line is probably Susan's. I was born in another time, another world. It's so huge. It says so much about society at the time and before and since. This touchstone for the generation gap becoming a chasm in the 60s. Yet it builds on that and complicates it by having the Doctor as the oldest one there. So it's not tethered to that era either. It's of the now and yet timeless, which is a theme going forwards.
I love that. Speaking about, planting that line that I've always just sort of seen as, beautifully economically put mysteriousness of going, oh no, this is emblematic of what was actually happening in the 60s, but then turns it on its head because it's not just the young one who's disassociated, it's the old one too. Although actually I'm drawn to the idea that both old and young are sort of in somehow detached from society, and both have to kick out against it in different ways. I think the young, try and change it. The old try and take it back to what it was, whilst in the middle is the current status quo. And I always think that the very old should have a little bit more kinship with the very young, because they're both I think sort of treated disdainfully by those who actually run the country and hold the power and influence the cultural output. And I think if the old and the young actually ganged up together, they could probably cause some real bother. But I like that. I like the way that Joy took that line and ran with it.
Number 4, got to say, the first time in the TARDIS, obviously, we're so used to that moment now, and it always feels to have a layer of irony and self-awareness. So to imagine seeing it fresh back then gives you real shivers, and it's played so well with how long they take to adjust, still rejecting the idea even as it's going on. So it makes it very vivid to a viewer watching it now.
Yes. Now, I thought everyone would choose this, you see. I thought everyone would choose, going into the TARDIS and wow, because it is so well directed by Waris Hussein. It is so well designed by Peter Brahatsky, both the dark, perverse shapes, musty atmospherics of the multi-level as well, let's not forget. And it's wooden and material and sort of disparate bric-a-brac of the junkyard, and then the gleaming, clean, white, sterile, massive TARDIS. That contrast, that stark Doctor Who-ness of ancient and modern, of old and futuristic, of musty and spooky and gleaming and clinical. I thought everyone would choose that, but they haven't. But Joy has, and rightfully so.
And number 5, I'm sure everyone's going to say the sound, which is amazing. But I actually love a sound that's not there. When Ian doesn't shut the car door, back to the doors again, and there's no off-screen sound effect for it either. It gives me a real pleasure and appreciation for all the plates those actors were spinning back then, having to be totally immersed in the moment, but also very technically on it, selling them getting out of the car but not causing any issues with sound or the things shaking, like those pesky TARDIS doors in the first pilot. It really captures how that episode is a time capsule for us watching it now, as well as still being so fresh and exciting in many ways. As an aside, I would just say, if I could change one thing about it, it would be calling it The Unearthly Child, because I find An Unearthly Child quite hard to say, but that's sacrilegious, I know, and probably get me cancelled. Anyway, probably cut that then. That's it. Happy 60th anniversary, everyone, and here's to eternity.
Joy, nobody's cancelling you. But interesting that you would, having only happened upon the importance of the An and mused about that earlier on in this set of podcasts, we've now had that refuted by you a couple of hours later. Isn't that interesting? But I loved that last point as well, because I thought, oh well, yeah, I chose the sound. We'll talk about the sound, but to apply it to William Russell's technical acting when shutting the car door is genius in its insightfulness, and speaks to something that I think we always overlook, and it really annoys me when people look back at old television and sort of talk about the performance style or the clunkiness of it or whatever, is how technical, as Joy points out, the actors have to be. Is that they're not just giving a performance and hitting their marks, that because they're doing it as live, they have various considerations that they have to make aid the technical competence of the production that they are in, which relies on them doing certain things in the moment which cannot be dealt with in post-production. So yes, it's not just that William Russell is charming and heroic and also funny and calming and all of those things that his performance is. It's that he also is an assured and experienced actor who is making sure that that door doesn't make too much noise, is making sure that I noticed a bit when I was watching it again this time just for pleasure, when Barbara is talking to the doctor when the doctor's just been looking at the vase, and the camera moves around and Ian has to step to one side to ensure that he's behind them and between them so that the camera is picking up the correct tableau that Waris Hussein has in mind, which is Ian slightly further back and in the middle, but you still can see his face, and the doctor and Barbara almost in profile talking to each other, because that is the picture that is needed, because the director is not just about orchestrating the action, it's about making sure that where his cameras end up, the people are in a position that means you can see them properly, or that the tableau that they are in is visually pleasing, or says something, represents something about their relationships and the dynamics. And again, all of that is being done weaving from one movement to the next, and it's almost like a ballet, except if it looked balletic it would look phony. So it has to look like natural movement, but it also has to look like an attractive televisual picture. And again, it can't be done by stop, set up now, stop, set up now. It has to fluidly move from the one to the other. The actors have to be fluid, and the cameras have to be a different kind of fluid, and those two different bits of fluidity have to sort of mix together in order to create something, a cohesive and visually pleasing whole. And all of that has to happen without us noticing that they're doing it. And that happens so much in television of this period, but particularly very well-made television, and An Unearthly Child is very well-made television. But there's the first vote for changing its name to The Unearthly Child. I mean, Joy, I think that is witchcraft. To the ducking stool with you. No, certainly not to the ducking stool with you, because I'm so, as I say, I'm lucky that there are people that I've spoken to and who might, feel slightly obliged because I was nice to them in a pub once or at a convention bar. But to somebody I've never met who has no reason to think of me as anything other than a pest, has applied herself so generously and thoughtfully, and given kudos to this endeavour by being a writer of modern to Who and of an episode I really enjoyed. I thank you, Joy. I'm very, very grateful. I'm sure I listened to something only yesterday, and the person involved said, no podcast should last more than 20 minutes. Oh, good Lord. Well, look, I mean, the content is I'm flabbergasted by not my contribution, but the illustrious nature of my guests and the way that they have gamely thrown themselves into this, and I think provided lots of interesting talking points. I hope I managed to match them, or at least throw some perspective on the things they'd said. I am extremely grateful to them all. I think we've probably got another 20 minutes to go in our final 20-minute episode, where I will have to fit in, how many guests have I got left? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, it's going to be another long one, but then we can bring these unearthly celebrations to an end. But I've very much been enjoying delving really deep into the minutiae, and for once getting lots of different perspectives. I hope you have too, and I hope this has sort of fed your anniversary lust, if you like. It's certainly been feeding mine, and it feels very appropriate at this time, living the hours between the anniversary, during the anniversary, between the anniversary, and the brave new world of the Star Beast, which coming just 2 days after the 60th anniversary seems so appropriate and wonderful and exciting, and it really does feel like a rebirth, and as though there's a good future ahead of us. The word Doctor Who is on everybody's lips, but I have just asked people to have one particular episode of Doctor Who on their lips, and that is An Unearthly Child. And I have 2 more writers from New Who, but from different eras of New Who as well. I've tried to get as an eclectic a mix of people as possible. 3 actors from New Who. That's exciting, isn't it? And somebody else. I mean, they're all guests that I'm greatly looking forward to hearing. One I have heard because I've spoken to them over the phone and recorded them that way. That was how they wanted to do it. But everybody else, to preserve the surprise, I don't know what they're going to say, but they are really interesting people, and they're all fans, but who have contributed to Doctor Who in major ways. And I am very, very much looking forward to hearing from them, and then rounding off with, and I think the only way I could. I really hope that you stick with this right through to the end for our final guest, because it fills me with joy that I'm going to be able to present you with that. So that is for the next episode. So I hope you can persevere with one more edition of Happy Times and Places, materialising firmly and only within the first 25 minutes of Doctor Who. So join me next time. In the meantime, thanks to all my guests and to you for listening. And I'm going to try and exit this one without making a sound. Well, thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. I'm extremely grateful to the special guest birthday greeters, Sophie Aldred and Lisa Bauman, Ace and Benny, of course. And I'm grateful to the guests who have given me their 5 favourite things about An Unearthly Child. They were Simon Guerrier, who can be found on Twitter at @ZeroTralala, Dominic Glynn, who is at DominicGlynn1, Joseph Lidster, who is at Joseph_Lidster, Paul Cornell, who is at Hammer House of Podcast, and Joy Wilkinson, who is at Joy of SE19. Thanks to all of them and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible. The music for Happy Times and Places is by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. And if you enjoy Happy Times and Places, there are other iterations of Toby Hadoke's Time Travels. To have them all under the same feed, they're under this umbrella, Toby Hadoke's Time Travels, but they're broken up into seasons. And Season 2 is Too Much Information, which is a blow-by-blow account of every episode of Doctor Who in chronological order, giving dates and biographies and observations. They go into minute detail and take a while to do. And Season 3 is Indefinable Magic, which are sort of whimsical extended monologues about a particular rabbit hole that I've decided to descend. And the sort of underrepresented 4th season is Far Too Much Information, which is actually a patron exclusive, but I was allowed to let one out, which is the one about the class of 63, the 7 school children extras in the very first episode that this podcast is all about. Have you noticed? So do check those out as they are alternative seasons wherever they are held. And I mentioned patrons there a couple of times. It's the patrons who make these podcasts possible and ensure they're ad-free. You can become a patron at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where for as little as £3 a month, you get advance releases, bonus material, more of those Far Too Much Informations, monthly AMAs, pictures of my dog. Oh, it's an embarrassment of riches, and everything is available at that lowest tier, although there are higher tiers as well. And you get 10% off whichever tier you're on if you sign up for a year. Now, you may not want to be attached to me for a whole year, but you still may like to support these endeavours, in which case you can go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke and donate as much or as little as you like, whenever you like, so long as you pretend it's a cup of coffee. And I know that times are hard financially, and I really am truly grateful that of all the stuff out there in cyberspace and all the Doctor Who content out there, you choose to listen to these. And if you enjoy them, I'd be really grateful if you could do something that costs you nothing but a little bit of your time, and that is to give these 5 stars and a few lines of review wherever you get your podcasts. Perhaps say nice things about them on social media as well. But 5 stars and a few lines of review really help to enable them to stick their head above the parapet and be seen by other people who hopefully will want to shoot them in their head, but will want to make friends with them, or at least listen to what they have to say without any form of marksmanship at all. Yeah, do that. If you enjoy tortuous and ill-conceived metaphors that sometimes end up in the wrong places, you can fund them or not. But yes, you can certainly score and rate them. That would be really very much appreciated. And you can follow me on Twitter at Toby Hadoke, these podcasts at Hadoke Podcasts, and I'm on Instagram at toby.hadoke, and I have a Facebook page, and I have a website, www.tobyhadoke.com. Thanks very much for listening. That really wasn't 20 minutes, was it?